Today's hearing will come to order. Welcome to our witnesses. Thank you for being here today. Dr. LaPlante, we are especially appreciative of your willingness to join us as a last-minute addition to this esteemed panel of witnesses. Testifying before the subcommittee, we have the Honorable Bill LaPlante, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment and Chairman of the Nuclear Weapons Council, the Honorable Jill Ruby, the Undersecretary for Nuclear Security and Administrator of the National Nuclear Security Administration, Dr. Vipin Narang, the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy, Vice Admiral Johnny Wolf, the Director of Strategic Systems Programs for the Navy, and Lieutenant General Andrew Jabera, who serves as the Air Force's Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Deterrence and Nuclear Integration. The subcommittee meets today to review the fiscal year 2025 budget requests of the Department of Defense and Department of Energy for the nuclear enterprise. To begin with, I was pleased to see nuclear modernization strongly supported in this year's budget request. As we have discussed in other hearings, the department faced many tough budget choices this year and accepted risk in various areas. The prioritization shown for nuclear activities in this budget request reflects a recognition that nuclear attack remains the only existential threat our nation faces, and therefore strategic deterrence must continue being our highest priority mission. However, I remain concerned that we are not doing enough to prepare for a future nuclear environment that will be more competitive and less stable than ever. As the Congressional Commission on the Strategic Posture of the United States concluded in its report last year, simply executing modernization plans developed over a decade ago will not be sufficient to meet the evolving threat environment. For example, Russia, which maintains the world's largest nuclear arsenal, continues to expand its stockpile, in addition to attempting to develop novel delivery systems, while illegally suspending its participation in the New START treaty. Today, China has more than 500 operational nuclear weapons, double the number since 2020. And the Department of Defense projects it will possess over 1,500 by 2035, and perhaps even sooner. They are building fields of missile silos and stealth bombers while developing a space architecture that greatly increases their ability to target and hold at risk the United States and its allies. Importantly, China's nuclear breakout was not anticipated when our nuclear modernization was originally conceived. And beyond Russia and China, North Korea and Iran continue down a dangerous path with Russia to develop advanced missile technology. The development of a nuclear sea-launched cruise missile mandated by Congress in the fiscal year 2024 Defense Authorization Bill will help address these threats. Still, I believe we must take additional steps and seek other creative solutions to ensure that we avoid a deterrence gap in the next decade. This concern also applies to the National Nuclear Security Administration. While I'm happy to see the intense level of support included in this budget request for production modernization, I'm concerned that this has come at the expense of stockpile research, technology, and engineering activities. Ultimately, our nation requires both a responsive production infrastructure and a weapons laboratory complex that are second to none. And we must ensure that NNSA's top line is sufficient to achieve both of these goals. Finally, I know the Sentinel missile program is at the forefront of our minds, and rightly so. This program is expected to recapitalize the land-based leg of the triad by replacing the aging Minuteman system, which has been deployed for over 50 years, despite being designed for a 10-year service life. However, I want to remind my colleagues that the Sentinel program is under a Nunn-McCurdy review, which will limit what our witnesses can discuss here today. While Dr. LaPlante, who leads that review, can discuss its structure and process, he cannot comment on its substance or presume its outcome. Similarly, General Jabera and Dr. Narang can comment on the need for the triad, the role ICBM capabilities play, and the unique contributions they make to deterrence. Still, they will similarly be unable to make comments about Sentinel that would presume the outcome of Dr. LaPlante's review. We all want to know what led to the Nunn-McCarty breach, why it happened, and what we're going to do to get the program back on track. I'm committed to having that discussion, but it will have to wait until a later date. Now, I would like to recognize Ranking Member Seth Moulton for any remarks he would like to make.
Thank you, Chairman Lamborn, and welcome to our panel of distinguished guests. Since holding this hearing 1 year ago, the global strategic landscape has continued to deteriorate. The CCP is expanding their nuclear arsenal at a rate that has exceeded U.S. intelligence estimates, while also developing and testing novel and destabilizing delivery systems, including hypersonic weapons more developed than our own, all of which could carry a nuclear warhead. War criminal Vladimir Putin continues to use thinly veiled nuclear threats in his criminal war against Ukraine, and he recently deployed dual-capable weapons on the border of Finland, one of the newest members of NATO. We are dealing with two near-peer nuclear-armed competitors we never have before. The jurisdiction of this subcommittee, while so esoteric that it's even further below the radar than our adversaries' hypersonics, remains one of the most consequential of any in Congress. The puns are esoteric as well. I believe my kids would be safer if we eliminated nuclear weapons. The sheer number of close calls with accidental launches the world has had in the mere 80 years, just one human lifetime, should concern anyone who understands basic statistics. I hope we never lose sight of what should be a shared goal of all humanity and all nations. But until we get there, we know only two fundamental ways to prevent nuclear weapons from ever being used. The first is reducing the number we all have through arms control, and the second is instilling confidence in our adversaries that the weapons we have are safe, secure, reliable, and can be employed to devastating effect. There's broad bipartisan support for the nuclear triad. This means making the significant investments across the Department of Defense and the National Nuclear Security Administration, the NNSA, to produce new platforms such as the B-21 and Columbia-class SSBNs, modernized delivery systems such as the Sentinel ICBM, long-range standoff weapon in the next Trident D5 life extension variant, and updating aging NNSA infrastructure across the national labs and production facilities. The administration understands this and has included $49.2 billion in the budget request to recapitalize all legs of the triad and improve nuclear command, control, and communications. While we are making those significant investments across every aspect of the nuclear enterprise, the reality is that both DoD and NNSA continue to struggle to develop and deliver new systems on time and on budget. We stopped making this stuff for a while. Most facilities that do still exist predate personal computers. Now, the elephant's foot in the room. Does anyone get that? Chernobyl. The Air Force recently notified Congress that the Sentinel program has reached a critical breach for both cost and schedule, an alarming at least over 37% over budget and at a minimum 2 years delayed. This means that if the program continues on the current path, it will be at least $30 billion over the initial estimate. This is completely unacceptable. The good American taxpayers that we represent deserve to know how the Pentagon and Northrop Grumman are wasting their money and imperiling our national security. Dr. LaPlante, I look forward to continuing an open dialogue with you and the Air Force as you work through the Nunn-McCurdy process to ensure we never end up in this spot again and deliver a critical capability in time to replace the aging Minuteman III ICBMs in the field today. Finally, I continue to worry that we as a nation have lost a critical capability when it comes to strategic deterrence. And this is not weapons or warheads, but rather the thought leadership around the basic theories of nuclear deterrence. During the Cold War, hundreds of scholars at universities and think tanks across America focused on understanding how and when countries would make the decision to employ such a devastating weapon. Today, while I know the Department of Defense conducts many war games, I fear that there is only a very small number of experts truly thinking about how modern strategic deterrence works, particularly when facing two nuclear-armed near-peer adversaries. I must say I am encouraged by General Cotton's leadership on this issue, but much more of the country needs to contribute as well. I hope today's witnesses can help this subcommittee better understand what is being done on both policy and acquisition to ensure that U.S. nuclear forces continue to keep us safe and secure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, and thank you. At 4:30 or thereabouts, there will be a long series of votes called, so we'll have to wrap up at that point in time. I hope that everyone here can ask a lot of questions and we can have a thoroughgoing discussion, and I look forward to that. But now we'll go to opening statements from our witnesses. I'd like you to know that your prepared statements will be made part of the record, but you have 5 minutes to make some opening remarks. Dr. LaPlante, let's begin with you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Lamborn, Ranking Member Moulton, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thanks for having this hearing on this important topic. And it's a pleasure to join my colleagues here on the topics of the nuclear deterrent of the United States, which underpins our entire national defense priorities and strategy. As was reiterated in the 2022 National Defense Strategy, as well as the Nuclear Posture Review in 2022, the Department of Defense is advancing our priorities for integrated deterrence, backstopped by a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent and a strong and credible extended deterrence. The 25 President's budget, as Ranking Member Moultrie said, reinforces this prioritization of our nuclear modernization sustainment efforts with $49.2 billion to recapitalize, sustain, and operate this nuclear enterprise. This includes full funding for the modernization of the three legs of the triad and for the sustainment and modernization of our NC3 systems. As was said by both the chairman and the ranking member, it's no secret that the geopolitical environment has continued to change, and not for the better, indeed, even since the 2022 Nuclear Posture Review. DoD is intimately aware of the significant challenges that we face, and this budget reflects both our serious commitment to the viability of a U.S. nuclear deterrent and the urgency required. The Department, as well as NNSA, have already taken steps to reduce risk to the modernization program and to field capabilities for this in the near term, including with flexibility for this deterrence. The Nuclear Weapons Council, which I chair, has likewise been working very hard and tirelessly to really understand the risk and act upon difficult decisions that will enable the United States to maintain this safe, secure, and credible nuclear deterrent into the future, to understand what the risks are, to mitigate those risks, and constantly be looking at the transition to the new systems. Modernization programs of this scale have not occurred since the Cold War, indeed for decades, and we are focused on mitigating potential risks and ensuring there are no gaps in capabilities during the transition from legacy to modern systems. And I would add to the point that the ranking member made, we are relearning, a whole generation is relearning how to build these systems, but also, to your point, how to think about deterrence and how to think about what it means to have deterrence. It is a whole relearning process that's happening in our country. There are bound to be some challenges given on scope and complexity, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we're making progress across the enterprise. A lot more work needs to be done. We're still at the beginning in some phases of this, but I want to thank this committee for its longstanding and bipartisan support for the nuclear deterrent mission, as well as to the dedicated professionals across the enterprise. Those are the warfighters that are at sea, that are in the missile fields, that are with the bombers, that are sustaining the systems 24/7, but also the civilians and the scientists and the engineers across our organizations, including the NNSA. These individuals work diligently every day to execute this mission. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Administrator Ruby.
Chairman Lamborn, Ranking Member Moulton, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to present the President's fiscal year 2025 budget request for the Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration. NNSA's fiscal year 2025 budget request is $25 billion, an increase of $865 million over fiscal year 24 enacted. The request supports sustaining the stockpile, delivering modernized weapons, and advancing production infrastructure revitalization to meet the demands of the program of record. It also supports our essential work in nuclear nonproliferation and naval reactors, both of which are critical to holistic nuclear deterrence and national security. The Weapons Activities budget request of $19.8 billion supports 6 weapon systems in our expanded program of record, and we commit to working with Congress on funding for SLCM-in. The 7-system program of record provides modernized weapons for all 3 legs of the triad and introduces new capabilities to meet the moment. The B-6112 and the W-88 Alt 370 weapons are in production. The W-80-4 remains aligned with the Air Force schedule for the long-range standoff missile, and we expect a first production unit in September 2027. The W-87-1 is currently scheduled to begin production in fiscal year 2031 or 2032, and the W-93 remains on track for production starting in the mid-2030s. With the fiscal year 2024 budget enactment, NNSA began working on the B-6113 program, with a first production unit expected in fiscal year 2026. I am proud to report that last year, NNSA delivered over 200 modernized weapons to the Department of Defense on schedule. This budget request will allow NNSA to maintain the pace of our stockpile modernization in tight coordination with the Department of Defense platform delivery schedules. With the current program of record, we expect continuous delivery of modernized weapons through the end of the decade and beyond. With an eye towards the future, this request supports 2 Phase 1 studies to begin defining how we will meet future deterrent needs. It also supports critical investments in science and technology that underpin and advance our stockpile stewardship and responsiveness efforts. In addition, the request supports enhanced physical and cybersecurity and increased nuclear enterprise assurance to keep pace with evolving threats. NNSA continues to advance extensive infrastructure modernization efforts to meet today's needs, and over the longer term provide a flexible and resilient enterprise. We are allocating resources to achieve production and safety priorities while also developing an enterprise blueprint that captures the needs for the future nuclear security enterprise. We are making tangible progress on both large and smaller scale projects. A milestone anticipated this year is the first diamond-stamped War Reserve W-87-1 plutonium pit from Los Alamos. Our highest infrastructure priority for safety, the uranium processing facility, is now over 60% complete, with construction scheduled to finish in 2027. The Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation Budget request of $2.5 billion invests in our nonproliferation, emergency response, and counterterrorism programs. All 3 programs are coordinating closely with allies and partners to advance U.S. global nuclear threat reduction and help shape future alliances in a shifting international landscape. Since cooperation with adversaries is low, NNSA is placing additional focus on developing technical means to detect, prevent, and counter nuclear proliferation. Efforts include improving space-based capabilities and emphasizing the use of artificial intelligence to support science and programs, while red teaming models to identify and prevent proliferation risks. The Naval Reactors budget of $2.1 billion supports NNSA's close partnership with the U.S. Navy in key areas of naval nuclear propulsion and the safe long-term storage of spent nuclear fuel. This keeps the U.S. nuclear fleet on the cutting edge of warfighting capability and maintains the assured second strike capability of the sea-based leg of the nuclear triad. NNSA is responding to the new national security reality, but work remains to create the necessary future deterrence environment and nuclear enterprise. With your continued support, I'm confident we can succeed. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Dr. Narang.
Chairman Lamborn, Ranking Member Moulton, and distinguished subcommittee members, thank you for inviting me to testify before you on the President's fiscal year 2025 budget request for U.S. nuclear weapon and warhead modernization sustainment, and thank you for your continued support. I'm honored to appear alongside Undersecretary LaPlante, Undersecretary Ruby, Lieutenant General Jabera, and Vice Admiral Wolf. Today's international security environment is highly dynamic and challenging. For the first time in history, we now face 2 major nuclear powers as strategic competitors, China and Russia. The People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation continue to rapidly evolve their military capabilities, including their nuclear forces, to hold a joint force and the U.S. homeland at risk and increasingly threaten U.S. allies and partners globally. In addition to enhancing their nuclear and other strategic capabilities, our competitors are challenging long-standing expectations of responsible conduct in the international system. To meet these challenges, the President's budget request for FY25 makes critical investments in the Department's strategic forces posture to strengthen deterrence and assurance of allies and partners. In nuclear strategy and posture, the President's FY25 budget request seeks critical investments across the U.S. nuclear enterprise. This request totals $49.2 billion for the modernization, sustainment, and operations of all three legs of the nuclear triad, and includes $11.3 billion for nuclear command, control, and communications, or NC3. For the Sea leg, the request includes $995 million for Ohio-class SSBN ship operations and depot maintenance, as well as $9.9 billion for the modern Columbia-class SSBNs. As the Sea leg is the most survivable leg of the triad, these and other investments are critical for maintaining the stabilizing and efficient elements of U.S. nuclear deterrence and assurance. For the Air leg, the President's budget requests $5.3 billion for the B-21 Raider bomber and $833.8 million for the long-range standoff LRSO cruise missile. These programs will contribute to the continued credibility of the air leg of the triad and provide the President with flexible and visible options to deter and respond to strategic attacks. An additional $21.6 million is requested for F-35 dual-capable aircraft. Collectively, these and other systems investments will help support the long-term effectiveness of the air leg. For the ground leg, the President's budget requests $194 million for Minuteman III sustainment, $3.7 billion for Sentinel, and an additional $565 million for development of the Mark 21 Alpha reentry vehicle. The ground leg is the most responsive and prompt element of the nuclear triad, as it is in a high state of readiness and communication can be achieved promptly. Intercontinental ballistic missiles deter aggression by signaling to any adversary that they can never be confident in disarming such a dispersed, reliable, and responsive capability. Finally, the FY25 request also contains $11.3 billion for NC3 recapitalization efforts to modernize, develop, and procure new equipment and capabilities for improved system survivability and mission performance. These funds continue development and production activities for multiple programs to enable assured connectivity to disseminate National Command Authority direction to fielded nuclear forces. These investments will build on the accomplishments of the past year, including the first flight of the B-21 Raider, preparations for a modern variant of the B-61 nuclear gravity bomb, the B-61 TAC-12, and the development of the higher-yield B-61 TAC-13, the completion of nuclear certification of U.S. dual-capable aircraft and personnel deployed to Europe in support of NATO, and the completion and delivery of a DoD strategy to defeat hard and deeply buried targets, which has enabled the Department to take steps to retire the obsolete B-83 gravity bomb. The Department will continue investing in both strategic and regional deterrence capabilities to protect the U.S. homeland, allies, and partners. To conclude, the Department remains focused on maintaining a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent and making the critical investments needed to strengthen the U.S.'s strategic force posture for both deterrence and assurance of allies and partners. We are committed to the modernization program and continue to assess whether any additional adjustments may be required to meet the evolving strategic environment. Thank you to the committee for its resolute support for the Department and our service members, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Admiral Wolf.
Chairman Lamborn, Ranking Member Moulton, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the Department of the Navy's budget priorities for nuclear forces. I'd like to thank this subcommittee for its continued support of the Navy's nuclear deterrence mission. As Director, Strategic Systems Programs, my mission is to provide credible and affordable strategic solutions to the warfighter. This mission is squarely nested in CNO's warfighter vision of the Navy, which states, "We are here to preserve the peace, respond in crisis, and win decisively in war." The contemporary global environment is fundamentally different than anything experienced in the past. According to the Bipartisan Strategic Posture Commission, established thanks to the foresight of this subcommittee, quote, "The United States is on the cusp of having not one, but two nuclear peer adversaries, each with ambitions to change the international status quo by force if necessary," end quote. That said, for nearly 7 decades, and with Congress's steadfast support, the Navy submarine force has served as the foundation for the U.S. strategic posture, operating on continuous patrol and providing an assured second strike capability. Since I testified before this panel last year, we have built on this remarkable history of deterrence, making such milestones as the final demonstration and shakedown operation for an Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine. And just last month, Undersecretary LaPlante signed an acquisition decision memorandum directing the Navy to initiate a program office for the Sea-Launched Cruise Missile Nuclear, or SLCM-N. Additionally, in coordination with our NNSA partners, we are initiating a nuclear weapon project to adapt a nuclear warhead for this new capability. This work has not been without its challenges. Long periods of nuclear sustainment has atrophied the domestic industrial base and its critical skills. Many key suppliers have left the business or reduced their footprint. Significant investments are required to build back capacity to handle multiple concurrent nuclear modernization programs. Furthermore, we are seeing exceptional inflation-based cost growth due to the aging industrial base, associated supply chain challenges, and material obsolescence. Nevertheless, we must continue to sustain today's deterrent while modernizing for the future. The Navy continues to manage the nuclear strategic weapon systems across three main mission priorities. First and foremost, we must maintain the current D5LE missile inventory and provide the necessary operational support to sustain Ohio-class submarines through the end of their life in the early 2040s. I'd like to thank the committee again for their continued support of the Navy nuclear deterrence mission infrastructure that enables sea-based strategic deterrence. Sustaining, modernizing, and building infrastructure capabilities are essential to maintaining and deploying forces in support of the Navy nuclear deterrence mission. Secondly, along with PEOSSBN, we must continue to ensure a seamless transition between Ohio-class and Columbia-class submarines. For my command, SSP, this requires a seamless transition of the current Trident II D5LE weapon system onto the new Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine. We have already started the work on the next variant of Trident, D5LE2, and its corresponding weapon system. D5LE2 will be necessary to outload the Columbia class, ensuring that the Trident strategic weapon system remains the most lethal and reliable weapon system ever designed. Finally, one of the greatest advantages the United States has is its alliances and partnerships. For decades, U.S. policy has recognized the contribution an independent British nuclear deterrent adds to NATO and indeed global stability. SSP will continue to support and sustain this most important relationship. As a demonstration of that support, I recently certified the crew and weapons system of the HMS Vanguard to conduct strategic deterrent operations following a 7-year deep maintenance and refueling period. Execution of these priorities is only possible through investment in our people, our infrastructure, and our industrial base. Nuclear modernization will take time, but I echo the Strategic Posture Commission's findings that urgent and comprehensive resourcing and whole-of-enterprise effort is absolutely essential. It is only through your continued support that the Department's highest modernization priorities can be achieved and the Navy can deliver a reliable sea-based strategic deterrent capability. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the dedicated Americans that make strategic deterrence their life's work. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. General Jabera.
Chairman Lamborn, Ranking Member Moulton, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I'm honored to appear before you as a representative of the Department of the Air Force's nuclear enterprise. Our mission, to maintain a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent, is as vital today as it was at the dawn of the nuclear age. Along with my teammates across the Department of Defense, the airmen and guardians of the DAF work tirelessly to ensure the U.S. retains the nuclear deterrent our nation demands. Their unwavering professionalism ensures the foundation of our national security remains strong, but we must provide them the right tools and capabilities to face emerging threats. Throughout the last year, global nuclear powers have continued to expand their strategic and non-strategic capabilities, creating modern and exotic weapons that in some cases remain unchecked in today's arms control regime. Moreover, these competitors are coordinating and cooperating, raising the risk of near-simultaneous conflicts. Our nuclear forces play an indispensable role in deterring aggression and assuring our allies and partners. They provide a foundation for our national defense strategy and underpin our commitments to the NATO alliance. Each element of the U.S. nuclear forces provides unique and complementary attributes. The triad's diversity creates a more flexible and resilient deterrent, providing multiple options for the President. This is a critical time, where aging legacy systems are quickly presenting future challenges. The Department of the Air Force's nuclear modernization programs of record We'll recapitalize our current systems and supporting infrastructure to deliver modern and credible deterrence capabilities. We are developing next-generation nuclear delivery systems and adapting our NC3 architecture and capabilities to increase resiliency and responsiveness. However, modernization is not without challenges. Programs like the B-21 and the LRSO cruise missile are currently broadly on track. However, Sentinel, as you know, is undergoing a critical Nunn-McCurdy review. Our adversaries are investing heavily in their own nuclear forces and are developing new and more capable systems. We must continue to innovate and adapt to ensure our nuclear forces remain credible and effective. We're committed to maintaining the highest standards of safety, security, and reliability for our nuclear forces. This requires sustained investment in our people, our infrastructure, and our capabilities. We're also committed to transparency and accountability. We understand the American people entrust us with an awesome responsibility, and we're committed to fulfilling that trust with integrity and professionalism. In conclusion, I want to express my deep appreciation to the members of the subcommittee for your continued support of our nuclear enterprise. Your support is critical to our ability to deter aggression, assure our allies, and protect our nation. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you, and thanks to all of you. We will now begin a round of questions, and each member will be limited to 5 minutes. Dr. LaPlante, last year, Section 1640 of the NDAA required the department to create a program of record for SLCM-N, Sea-Launched Cruise Missile Nuclear. Can you update the subcommittee on the department's implementation of this provision?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, in accordance with the law, as you cited, I think it was within 90 days of the enactment of the law, I was required, and I did, administer an ADM, administer an acquisition decision memorandum directing, in this case, the Navy, to establish a program office for the SLCM-N program. And the program office under Admiral Wolf in the Navy is off and working, and the intent is to, over the next months, perhaps even a year, look at what options there are leading up to what we would call a milestone A. So we've begun that process, and we're following the law exactly.
Thank you. Administrator Ruby and Admiral Wolf, can you briefly talk about the steps you're taking to carry out this program that we just talked about?
Yeah, NNSA has also stood up a program office, and we're working closely with Admiral Wolf and his team to define the warhead and that will mate with the delivery system selected. Our goal in NNSA is to develop a warhead that is the easiest to produce, that meets the requirements, so that we can squeeze it in to the program of record in the way requested by the 2024 NDAA.
Yes, sir. And from a Navy perspective, as Secretary Plant said, we have gotten the ADM. We have stood up a program. I've got a lead for that. We are working with NNSA, and I'm actually working across both the Navy and the Air Force to understand what are the options that we can go look at over the next year to understand what's the right material solution that gets us the capability that has been asked for, but does it in a way to do no harm to the rest of the triad and make sure it's efficient and as cost affordable as we can make it.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, I'm going to ask a little bit about Sentinel program and the Nunn-McCurdy process. And I say process, not the substance or not the prediction of any outcomes. But on this process, Dr. LaPlante, can you give us an overview and how your office is carrying out its work?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'll review the process, and this process is codified in statute. And as some of us have mentioned privately and publicly to some of you, this was actually a very sensible statute in the steps that are required to take, as I'll go through them. So a critical Nunn-McCurdy breach triggers this requirement that must be fulfilled by my office, and it must do the following things, and it's within approximately 120 days of the President's budget submission. So that deadline for us roughly is July 10th or so of 2024. So here's the process that must happen. Oh, by the way, in doing this process, this is the end of which will either be a certification that the program or a modified version of the program go forward, or a cancellation of the program. And so as you've alluded to, Chairman, we are in the process right now and not prejudging the results of this. There are 5 fundamental, or really 6 fundamental questions that need to be answered as part of a certification, and we have groups off doing this as we speak. The first is that there is to be a determination that the continuation of the program is essential to national security. That's number 1. Number 2, that there are no alternatives to the program which will provide acceptable capability to meet the joint military requirement at less cost. Sometimes this is referred to as a mini AOA, analysis of alternatives. 3, that new cost estimates have been determined by CAPE to be reasonable, CAPE being the independent cost estimator. 4, that the program is a higher priority than those whose funding that could be reduced to cover the increased cost of the program. And 5, the management structure is adequate to manage and control program costs, that we have an independent assessment of the management structure. There is also an assessment that's going to do root cause, getting to root cause of a plane crash or any other accident requires a lot of work. Sometimes what you see initially is not actually the root cause. The same is true of an acquisition program. We have a multidisciplinary team looking at the root causes here, and that will also be part of what's produced at the end of this process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ranking Member Moulton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. LaPlante, recent statements from Air Force officials indicate that there was knowledge of issues on the Sentinel program in early 2022, yet Congress has not made aware formally of these issues until March timeframe last year. I know you can't go into specific detail on root cause that's being reviewed by the Nunn-McCurdy team, but can you please outline the factors in costs and schedule overages that led to this critical breach?
Yeah, thank you, Representative Moulton. So a quick summary, sort of when I got into this job in the summer of 2022, I went with the Air Force out to Hill Air Force Base and reviewed where the program was. And at that point, what was key to me and to the leadership in the Air Force is that we needed a reliable integrated master schedule. In the absence of an integrated master schedule, it was difficult to say were we exactly on the schedule or not. We knew it was.
For those who might not be familiar with project management, is it unusual to have an integrated master schedule for a project?
By the time you're 6 months into after a milestone B, you should have an integrated master schedule.
I mean, for like any major project.
Yeah, you
right?
should. Yeah.
Not even, I mean, just like a project to build a hotel or something.
Right. We have a concept called owning the technical baseline, and that the program office and the government should own the baseline. Included in that, central to it, to your point, is having an integrated master schedule. Absolutely. So then fast forward, by fall of 2023, this past fall, as the Air Force got further along in the design, particularly details of the launch facility, we were getting more fidelity on where we thought the schedule was. This led up to a so-called launch facility summit that the Air Force held in early December of 2023. At the end of that, a week or so later, was when the program office from the Air Force had enough information to submit the program deviation report, which was where the cost growth that you cited earlier, which led the next month to the Air Force to determine a non-McCurdy
Well, I would just say, like, I get the timeline,
Yeah.
but that's a long delay.
It is.
Between the first indications and letting us here in Congress know. Do you have any insight into the relationship between Northrop Grumman and the subcontractors and how they're flowing information? Because it seems like that's part of the problem here.
Yeah, we've been looking at this, and I know the Air Force is, particularly the subcontractors include Bechtel, for example, on the construction front. I think initially, like anything else initially, there needed to be improved communications. I would say right now, we regularly meet with both the CEO of Northrop and Bechtel. But it needs to be every day. It needs to be every day, and I would also defer to my Air Force colleague if he wants to add to that.
Sorry, Darrell.
Sorry, Member. I agree with the statement of more communication is always better and less communications is always worse. I do think that the communications have improved greatly with the contractor. In terms of how much this is causal and to where we are today, I would like to defer that until the non-McCurdy review is complete. Because
Sure. Another thing that tends to help with these programs is competition. In a recent missile defense hearing, I asked witnesses to cite one example where reducing competition has resulted in delivering a capability faster or at lower cost, and there was deafening silence. What do you think about just the structure of this contract for the beginning? And I know you can't presuppose the outcomes of this investigation, but are there lessons we're learning?
Or relearning, yes. I think a couple things. One is competition actually does work. You see it in space launch and in space overall with new entrants, whether it's in launch or in putting up satellites. It changes behavior, including of incumbents. In the case of this program, as this committee probably knows, but I'll reiterate it, back in 2018, 2019, when this was under competition or intended to be, there were two industry teams. One team that had one of the solid rocket motor makers on it, one potentially the other, and there was a merger that happened in the solid rocket motor world, and one of the teams decided not to bid on the contract, pending resolution in its favor of what he thought were concerns of competitive concerns. That was not resolved, and so effectively there was not, at the end of the day, a competition in this program.
And this is the problem, is when we have this massive consolidation in the defense industry, which a lot of people don't want the government to regulate, it can be a prime cause of some of these issues. I'm almost out of time, but just if you could, Dr. LaPlante, one question for the record. B-21 and Sentinel both have the same contractor and yet remarkably different outcomes in terms of contract performance. Really like to understand what are some of the differences that we could learn there. And then, again, I only have 20 seconds, but to change topics for a second, Vice Admiral Wolf, Congress has required the development of the SLCM-N. To date, the Navy has not been able to provide even a rough estimate of all the work needed to be done across the fast attack fleet to actually employ these weapons. For the record, can you please outline what modifications would need to be made both to the platform and the larger fast attack fleet enterprise to be able to carry a SLCM-N, and are you accounting for these costs in your program? And you can take that for the record. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
We'll take that for the record for the lack of time. Representative Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank each of you for your service. And it's particularly important to me because I grew up with an appreciation of nuclear deterrence for peace through strength. I grew up in the holy city of Charleston, South Carolina, and would practice football at East Bay Playground on the harbor, and we could see the nuclear submarines go by. And in fact, we knew they were important because during the Cold War, for 40 years, there was a Soviet fishing trawler fishing right off the coast of Charleston, monitoring the submarines. So we knew how important that was. Also, I'm very grateful. I'm the only member of Congress who's actually served and worked at the Savannah River site. So thank you so much for what you do. And Administrator Hruby, it's good to see you again. And indeed, representing the Savannah River site is so important to me and to our country. I know firsthand the local communities of Aiken and Barnwell counties are of warm support for the site. With that in mind, we need understanding as they transfer from being an environmental management to an NSA, a understanding and commitment that the payment in lieu of taxes stay in place. It's just crucial with nearly a third of almost each county now being part of the site, which the people were happy somewhat to depart in 1950 for the site. And so what is your view about payment in lieu of taxes?
We don't intend to make any changes to payment in lieu of taxes.
Excuse me?
Right, we will support payment in lieu of taxes.
Here, good.
Yeah.
Yes, sounds good. Thank you very much. And also, Madam Administrator, indeed, we know how important it is that the infrastructure be developed. We have dictatorships that are modernizing, whether it be war criminal Putin, his conduct, the largest military buildup in the peacetime in the history of the world by the Chinese Communist Party. We have the regime in Tehran developing a nuclear capability as they also develop ICBMs to attack America. And this is in addition to DPRK, North Korea, who are such a threat to our great ally of South Korea and Japan. With that in mind, as we modernize, we currently are trying to upgrade our plutonium pits production and having a two-site solution. You mentioned Los Alamos. Indeed, what is your view about continuing the two-site solution to include Savannah River site?
Yeah, Congressman Wilson, we are very committed to the two-site solution, and you can tell that from our budget requests and from our activities at the site. We're further along at Los Alamos. They'll produce the pits for the W87-1, but we expect the pits for the W93 to be produced at Savannah River. We've done early site preparation. We've done long lead procurements. We have a plan to do early construction work. We have a very firm deadline for construction of 2032 that we're collectively pulling towards, and then a plan to transition to full operations to produce at least 50 pits per year by 2035 at
Thank you.
Savannah River.
Hey, thank you so much. And indeed, the people of Savannah River, the region of western South Carolina, Savannah River region, are just so supportive and enthusiastic to back you up in every way. With that in mind, Dr. LaPlante, you mentioned about the growing threat that we have from more Kremlin Putin, the Chinese Communist Party, DPRK, in Iran. And the regime in Tehran is developing nuclear capability, which would be as essential for our allies of Israel and ultimately as essential for our other allies of Saudi Arabia, of Jordan, it goes on, our Persian Gulf allies. Hey, it would be as essential to our NATO member, Turkey. Over and over again, this has got to be addressed. And so what do you see and what can be done to address the nuclear capability of the regime in Tehran?
Yeah, well, I will, on the specific for the Tehran regime, I would also defer to my policy person. I would say from a geopolitical perspective, China does appear, just by the reports that are even in the open media, to have done some bit of a breakout, and that is different than during the Cold War. We have now a potential two-peer adversary for nuclear, but I defer on the Iran question to my policy colleague.
Congressman, thanks for the question. I mean, the intelligence community still assesses that Iran has not made the decision to develop a nuclear weapons capability. It is administration policy to not allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon. We're obviously monitoring their enrichment activity very, very closely, but administration policy remains the same, that we will not allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Representative Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman, and all the witnesses for being here today. A number of questions have already been brought up concerning the Sentinel program and Nunn-McCurdy. And again, we're skating around this, but Dr. LaPlante, can you talk to us about, in terms of a requirement change from when we started, added or subtracted to this program versus an unknown condition or an increased of those unknown conditions? So I get if we didn't know it, especially on an existing platform, and I will suggest that the main difference between the B-21 and Sentinel is we have an existing platform. B-21 is brand new. So looking at existing conditions are much more difficult, particularly underground. So you have, in one silo, no pun intended, the issues of increased costs on given things. But us adding a requirement, can you talk about the difference of those on this program?
Yeah, thank you, Representative. I've done, of course, a lot of thinking, like all of you, about the differences and the similarities between any of these, but B-21 and, for example, Sentinel. Just as a beside, I was AQ, the acquisition exec for the Air Force, when we awarded the B-21 at the time. And there's lots of differences, of course, and I would defer to the root cause in Nunn-McCurdy. Bill LaPlante's personal view, not the Nunn-McCurdy view, is a couple things. Number one is, I think you alluded to it, the B-21, or at the time called LRSB, was a clean sheet, essentially. I mean, it wasn't to take the B-2 or the B-52 or the B-1 and pieces of it and modernize it, whereas the Sentinel has got some degree of hybrid in it. That's one point. The other point was that, and again, I don't know how big of a factor this is, but certainly the ground segment of the Sentinel, the last time this country had really done the detailed designs and implementation of it, was probably since the 1960s. That was not the case with the B-21. We had enough more recent 10, 20 years of design, particularly not even in nuclear bombers, to rely on. The third piece, and I'm not saying these are the final results, this is just Bill LaPlante's opinion, is we had two industry teams in B-21 all the way up to Milestone B where we did the down select. Both of those teams were at a preliminary design review quality of design. And the CEOs of those companies had to certify if the design they submitted for the final proposal was significantly different than the PDR. So we really had a good deal of stability in 2 offers, and we had that thing called competition. So those are some of the observations of the differences.
Just to follow up on that, and again, I'm going to stop with the Sentinel on this, is the one thing we know how to do in this country is to build things. And Bechtel, Premier, Hoover Dam, they built the biggest, whether it was last year or 50 years ago. And the main part that I wanted to bring up, if we're changing the requirements or what we asked for originally, you know, we'll take that on us. We made that change versus them not seeing or anticipating an unknown cost. So let me just leave with that and kind of switch over to another issue that we talk about so often, and that's our industrial base. Of all the systems and programs that are running on in the Department of Defense, I would say our submarine program is single focus on the industrial base, particularly the personnel, the people, the humans that takes, because that's the longest lead item. Admiral Wolf, can you talk us through what investments we've made? I talked about the human factor, but is it working? Are we increasing that industrial base? Because if we look at the reports, Columbia being behind, dropping one on Virginia, those issues, is our investment working of trying to build that industrial base?
Yes, sir, although I don't directly run the Columbia program, but what I would tell you is, having watched this, I believe it is, and here's the reason I say that. The investment to date has really gone to your point, getting some of these companies that haven't done this for a long time, not maybe our big primes, but all of the supporting entities that have to build the piece parts, the components, the materials that we provide to our primes to actually build these submarines. So that's where their investment has gone, and you can start to see how that is growing. And you can even look at the primes and how they're starting to hire, the amount of labor and workforce that they're starting to bring in. It just takes time. We haven't done this in a long time. So to think that we're going to invest and immediately see a response from that, you've got to build that, to your point. You've got to get those people trained. So I think give it time, and you will see that start to come fruition as we start to get longer into these builds.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Representative Desjardins.
Thank you. General Jabara, one of the main attributes of the ICBM leg of the triad is responsiveness. I know we're in an open session which limits how much you can say, but are you aware of any changes in the threat environment that reduce the need for responsive nuclear forces?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I'm not aware of any changes. To the contrary, I think it's getting more challenging over time.
So it's not something that's become less important.
No, sir, it's critically important.
ICBMs also have very high availability. Submarines rotate, bombers are not on nuclear alert, so ICBMs comprise a significant portion of the day-to-day forces available to the President. Have there been any changes in the threat environment that reduce the need for available forces on a day-to-day basis?
Congressman, no, there have not.
Okay, thank you. Dr. LaPlante, the FY25 budget requests about $3.7 billion for continued research and development of the Sentinel missile. I'm sure critics of the program will say that the program is behind schedule and a review, so the money isn't needed. Can you address that for us, and why is it important that work continue on the program, and how disruptive would it be if everything was paused until further notice?
Yeah, thank you. And again, the Nunn-McCurdy process is going on independently. So separate from that, just say a couple things. Number one, that the RDT&E that's going on in Sentinel, just like the RDT&E that's going on in B-21, and frankly even Columbia to some extent, is actually product development. So that's the thing to think about. We sometimes match product development with R&D, like it's at science and technology. So it's actually developing, doing the designs and developing Sentinel, point one. Point two is, and I'll just use the December program deviation number for the cost increase. If you took that cost increase that was notified to Congress in December as being the ground truth as best we know it, and it's going to be updated by Nunn-McCurdy, actually those cost changes are not going to happen for 3-4 years from now if they happen. In other words, the work that needs to happen now in this year needs to happen regardless.
Okay, so the administration continues to support the budget request that has been submitted, and it's too soon to jump ship to the conclusion that the money isn't needed. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, we're halfway through the Nunn-McCurdy, and we'll either certify or we will not. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Ruby, how is an NSA contributing to the Nunn-McCurdy process, and how do schedule changes on the DoD side of the Sentinel program impact your work on the W-87-1 warhead?
Yeah, we're really not part of the Nunn-McCurdy process, but I do appreciate that we get invited to the updates so that we can stay current on the process. With respect to the schedule for the W-87-1, we're staying with our current schedule until, of course, Nunn-McCurdy is complete or perhaps beyond. Our only real concern is whether flight tests will stay on schedule so that we can complete our development and production work.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Representative Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. General Guevara and Dr. LaPlante, the transition from Minuteman III to Sentinel will take a number of years and will require significant planning, resources, and attention. What efforts is the department undertaking or planning to ensure that Minuteman III remains a functional and viable strategic deterrent?
I'll start and then turn it over to my colleague from the Air Force. So exactly right. The Sentinel transition to Minuteman III is just in the baseline schedule, which is pre-Nunn-McCurdy, is nominally 7 to 10 years. During that time, we have to make sure, the Air Force has to make sure that Minuteman III remains reliable, accurate, and operational as the new system comes on. And that is a continued series of constant maintenance, testing, and the rest. And it's again, this system is near the end of its life, although there's still life to go, and there's just a lot of work to keep it going. But I know the Air Force will focus on that. And just over to my colleague.
Thank you, sir. So in addition to that, I would say that the Air Force, as part of our reoptimization strategy to looking to the future, has identified a 2-star program executive officer to take over Minuteman program. So whereas today we have a colonel in charge of the Minuteman sustainment and a colonel in charge of the Sentinel program, we'll bring that up to the 2-star level and have that same officer control both so that we have those synergies to make sure that there is that seamless transition. Beyond the acquisition side of the house, there's the training and sustainment side, and this year's budget requests $1.7 billion for Minuteman sustainment as well. So it is getting more expensive every day, and it's getting more difficult to maintain it, but we do, because we absolutely have to have the very last alert that missile keeps needs to be just as effective as the first alert. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ruby, if the Minuteman III system experiences a rapid loss of operational capability, for example, due to age out of critical components, how long would it take to put in place mitigation steps to ensure that America's nuclear deterrent remains viable?
Well, this is really a question for my colleagues at the Department of Defense, but we do think about these transition risks and what we could do in terms of our existing weapons stockpile on other platforms. And I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
So, Congressman, part of the plan on the Minuteman system is there's a requirement for multiple warheads on the system for that kind of issue. If, in addition to operational capabilities, if there was a problem with one, we would have that redundancy in others. In addition to that, we have the ability, if the president so ordered, to put multiple warheads per missile if some of the missile field was to go down. So there's a variety of things we could do to ensure. Now, I would also add that each of the parts of the triad complement each other in certain ways. So we do have the ability to upload in one area if one of a different part of the triad was to go down. Over.
Thank you. General Guevara, the PRC is the primary challenge for the U.S. defense and a growing factor in evaluating the U.S. nuclear deterrent, followed by Russia and North Korea. Is our nuclear modernization and defense posture enough to detour the PRC and maintain international security?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I believe that our deterrent force is enough for today. The Strategic Posture Commission that that the Congress asked to take a look at this has recently come out and said that our posture is, our program of record is necessary but not sufficient. I believe that is broadly true going into the future. The department is working on what are potential ways to modify that program of record, and I'd like to defer to my policy colleague to go into more detail about that.
Congressman, thanks for the question. As General Jabara indicated, we are constantly assessing the security environment, as we said we would with the nuclear posture review. And given the current and anticipated deterioration of that security environment, marked by multiple nuclear challenges, as many of you have identified, and the transition risks that we've talked about, last fall the department initiated a senior-level policy-led process with all the key stakeholders, including NNSA, ANS, Air Force, Navy, to examine the sufficiency of the nuclear modernization program of record for both central and regional deterrence. And while that process is still ongoing, the Bipartisan Strategic Posture Commission report largely aligned with our key finding that the program of record is necessary but may not be sufficient in the future for both central and regional deterrence. And so we are in the process of considering what adjustments may be necessary without necessarily increasing the size of the stockpile. And one example of that is the B-61 TAC-13, which we thank you for your support as an example of how we can address the changing security environment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm out of time. I yield back.
Thank you. Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to follow on to DeJarlet's comments and Carvajal's, and Dr. LaPlante, I appreciate your referencing of the triad, and General Cabrera, your statement of the deterrence effect of the triad. And I have a couple questions with you, General, concerning the aspect of MIRVing. Through the START process, we substantially and eliminated MIRVing of our ICBM force. The issue of the vulnerability of the ICBM force in deterrence is one I know that that's within your portfolio. But many people say that because the ICBM force doesn't move, that it's resident at single locations, that it has an increased vulnerability. But we have many ICBMs spread out over a significant area. And that has an impact on the whole concept of vulnerability, correct, as to the difficulty of someone in a first strike scenario being able to even eliminate the leg of the triad of ICBMs. Could you speak of that for a moment, please, General?
Congressman, thank you for the question. So you're absolutely right that the system is distributed so that there's 400 missiles, each with a single warhead, dispersed in an area the size of a small state. And so these are very large missile fields when you add them all up. And if a single node is taken out, these are all hardened and deeply buried systems. We believe it would take at least one and potentially more than one direct hit to take out a node by a nuclear weapon. When you disperse out 400, you would have to have hundreds and hundreds of weapons in order to take out the node. So each individual node is not moving, but the system as a whole is very, very survivable.
And also, General, why that supposedly would be happening if there was such a scenario for it to occur, we're aware that these missiles are coming here. So that our adversaries are also subject to, we do have the choice of launch, which also adds added deterrence to that scenario, correct?
Congressman, so that is correct, that the ICBM leg is the most quickly able to be executed if the president was to decide to do that. The entire triad is designed to maximize the options for the president. So we don't ever want to have, in a nuclear scenario, an option where the president has no options to either retaliate or choose not to retaliate and choose to assess more at a different time. So he has that option, but doesn't have to make it.
So, General, on the ICBM leg, we had this decision when we were in START negotiations previously, right? We could have said, well, hey, if we only want 400 nuclear warheads, perhaps we only need 10 delivery systems, we only need 10 missiles. Let's consolidate 10 with 40 warheads on top of them, and then we'd only have 10 missiles. But that would have increased our vulnerability, right? Wouldn't that have been a silly decision on our part and not have the benefit of what you just described of this large territory that is less vulnerable to attack?
So Commerce, I would just say that the decision on how many in the system to have has varied over time. At one point, we had 1,500 ICBMs in the fields. Due to the security situation being as it is, our assessment is that 400 is the right number for today. Going forward, that could change. It could stay the same.
But General, let's be specific. If we had 400 missiles with one single warhead on them, and we went to 200 with 2 missiles on each, our vulnerability, our ability to deter our adversary, because it would take less of their missiles to hit our missiles and render them unable to be launched, it creates greater vulnerability, correct?
That is correct, sir.
So in the aspect of deterrence, which is what we want deterrence. We want to deter our adversaries from ever considering striking the United States with nuclear weapons. By having more missiles spread out of a larger area, we increase deterrence and deter our adversaries from what could be a nuclear conflict, correct?
I think that's correct, sir.
Thank you, General.
Thank you. Representative Houlihan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for the time. I think that probably is the bell for votes. And I have a few questions that maybe follow on Chairman Turner's questions. I served in the Air Force, and so I understand the argument of the triad. I understand, the history of it as well. But I also know that we're in a unique time where we need to modernize, but we are also being pressured in terms of where our resources are going, the financial resources. So I was hoping that you might be able, with that as context, to be able to talk about if there are any cost-effective strategies that you are aware of and that you are pursuing to be able to enhance nuclear capabilities. I know that this is an open setting, but I'm hoping that you might be able to articulate some of the things that have been done or will be done that allows our money to go farther in the modernization.
Yeah, I can start. Again, without revealing anything in the non-McCurdy, one of the, and you know this because of your background, that one of the things we train folks in the acquisition as well requirements community is do trades. We call it cost capability trades. So basically, you can come up with a design and you cost it out, and then say, okay, if I wanted to monetize the requirements and what's most important to the warfighter, what is at the top of the list and what are you willing to give up? That's called cost capability analysis. A lot of times there's the big R requirement, which is usually set in stone, but a lot of times it's really the small r, the derived requirements. Oh, you need the security to be like this. Okay, well, there's 3 or 4 different ways to do it. Have we looked at the most cost-effective way to do it? Have you looked again? So those trades are happening right now as part of the non-McCurdy. It's to look at the small r requirements and say, is there a much more or an inexpensive way to do that?
And are there also considerations similarly to interoperability and integration of the nuclear forces with conventional forces as well?
I'll defer to my Air Force colleague on.
Thank you for the question. So most of the air leg of the triad is a dual capability, so it's both conventional and nuclear, depending on what we do with it. So that is inherently getting after your question. One other one I would add to Dr. Plant's comment. So an example of looking at big R requirements and what can we do was done with our weapons generation facilities. So several years ago when we kind of came up with the design for the weapons generation facilities, they were much more expensive than we thought was palatable. Going after this kind of work, we found ways to get to a more reasonable level, and in the President's budget this year, we have the Ellsworth WGF.
And my next set of questions has to do with an opportunity that I had last week to go to Vienna and visit the IAEA, be able to understand what's being done there in terms of cooperation and collaboration to try to focus on non-proliferation. And I was wondering if you guys would be able to reflect on what the DoD and the DOE is doing, if anything, to work with our international partners on these non-proliferation efforts.
Yeah, thanks for that question. We work really closely with the IAEA and the NNSA, and lately the work has been focused on Ukraine for one thing, and also on the expansion of nuclear power, nuclear energy generation, to make sure that's done in a way that will not be, that countries are not hiding behind or have a nascent nuclear weapons program. A lot of work with peaceful uses and with IAEA, and we're proud to have them as a partner and provide a lot of support.
Congresswoman, that's a great question. I would be remiss if I didn't add that one of our greatest nonproliferation tools is our extended deterrence architecture. The extended nuclear deterrent that we provide to NATO and to our Indo-Pacific partners is one of our greatest nonproliferation tools. We work every day on our extended deterrence relationships so that our allies can rely on our nuclear capabilities and not their own. And that's one of the reasons why we're committed to the modernization program as well. Each leg of the triad is a key assurance mechanism as well.
And that's my last question, which is what kind of mechanisms do exist or are in place to be able to enhance burden sharing and cooperation in the nuclear-related capabilities and responsibilities?
Thanks, Congressman. We've worked very hard in the department, particularly in our office at NATO and in the Indo-Pacific, to increase nuclear burden sharing, particularly in NATO over the past 2 years. We've had a lot of unity in the nuclear bodies at NATO that have increased the role of our allies in contributing to the nuclear deterrent mission, and we're seeing the same emerge in our Indo-Pacific alliance architecture as well.
Thank you. I yield.
Thank you. We're going to try to squeeze in the last two questioners before we adjourn for votes. Representative Bacon.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. We appreciate your testimony. First, I just want to say I think the Sentinel program is imperative for our national security and strategic deterrence. Having 400 ICBMs is so important to our deterrence. I fear, though, if we have more failures from the Air Force on this, it's going to undercut support. So we got to get this right. With 50-year-old ICBMs, we can't sustain them any longer. And I've looked at it more in the classified realm, so I can't go into a lot of detail. But without 400 ICBMs, the number of targets the Russians and Chinese have to go after is very few, and I think it creates a very risky environment for us. So we got to get this right. My first question, though, is on the E4, the SAOC, and it's to General Jabara. Last Friday, the Air Force announced the source selection of the SAOC, which replaced the aging E4, the Night Watch aircraft based at Offutt. We noticed that the Air Force unfunded priorities list this year included a large request, $158 million, to begin MILCON planning and design for SAOC basing, which is projected to deliver around FY32. What would be the scheduled impact of the SAOC and the E4B retirement if this unfunded priority is not resourced this year?
Congressman, thank you for the question. So the E4 National Airborne Operations Center, the current system, the new system will be the SAOC, Survivable Air Operations System. The MILCON associated with that is on the unfunded list. If not funded, we would go back in the 26 POM and get that back on the list. There will be some amount of commensurate delay to that. Could be up to that entire year, could be slightly less than that. And if you'd like, I can go to the record and go more detailed with your staff after.
It seems imperative that we get funding for it because it's very much needed. A related question, but this is with the ABINCAP or the Looking Glass mission. I'm concerned about the future of it. The Navy has decided to retire the E-6B Mercury and move the TACAMO mission to the C-130J. So what is our plan to replace the E-6 and maintain the Looking Glass mission?
Congressman, thank you. So currently there is a trade study underway that is being led by OSD and STRATCOM, U.S. Strategic Command, to get after what is the future of that mission space look like. Most of this goes classified very quickly, so I can talk to you in a classified forum in more detail. But based on the results of that trade study, then we'll take appropriate actions on that.
Yeah, I would add, Congressman, and you would know with your background, General Cotton is the first to remind everybody that this ABINCAP mission is a must-do mission. And so, yes, we have the TACAMO going the 130 route, but we cannot let the mission is still a required mission, and we must fulfill it for the ABINCAP.
I know, I think you've heard me get on my soapbox before on this, but I'd love to have you all consider where we need to take the Looking Glass mission. In 1990, we stopped the 24/7 airborne with the general on board. That was appropriate. The Berlin Wall fell, or the Soviet Union fell. But I think we're back to the threat environment where, with the invasion of Ukraine, the saber rattling that Putin's been doing, and the Chinese rapid development of nuclear weapons to trying to match ours, it seems to me we need to go back to a 24/7 airborne alert, or maybe it could be a ground capability. But I'm really concerned about the risk of 15-minute warning times now with hypersonics. Can we, with a 15-minute ground alert, get these aircraft off when we need them? Because we have to convince Russia and China that there's no way they can decapitate us. They can't take out the White House, the Pentagon, Stratcom. What I'm concerned about, we've been talking about this for years, but there's been no decision yet. And I want to push the DoD team, down the road on this.
Yeah, I would put this, and again, Congressman, you know this because of your background. We put this under one of the unresolved NC3 Next issues, and it's really moving towards mobile and survivable. And the blank sheet right now is the ABNCAP mission. We commissioned a study in the department that is supposed to be done by June, and the intent of the study is to tell us what are we going to do in these areas and get it into the budget.
Yeah.
Because you're exactly right.
We're back to, we flew the 24-hour mission for 29 years and then stopped at 1990. So, and granted, there's different ways to solve this mission area, but we need an answer pretty quick, I think. Russia needs to know that we have an answer, and China needs to know that we have an answer. So thank you for hearing me out. I yield.
Thank you. Representative Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm delighted that so much of this hearing is focused on the Sentinel and on the Nunn-McCurney. My question to Dr. LaPlante, can you assure this committee that you will develop, the department will develop, a complete, full, honest analysis of the Sentinel as required by law, hitting all 6 of the issues that you raised a moment ago, or several moments ago?
Yes, Congressman, I intend to fulfill the spirit and the letter of the law for all 6 of those items. Yes.
Thank you. And does that also include the option of not having a Sentinel or having half of a Sentinel or some variation?
Yeah, just to go through the possibilities of the outcome. The possibilities of the outcome could be, I would say, one of 3 things. One is the program could be recertified sort of largely as is. Number 2, the program could be canceled. And then the third, it could be certified with modification. Those are the 3 broad categories that could be the outcome here.
Very good. General Guevara, you indicated that the Sentinel or the Minuteman III is the one system that is always ready. Maybe I misinterpreted what you said, but I think you did say that.
So, Congressman, the land leg of the triad is on alert and always ready. Did not imply that the submarines were not on alert. The submarines are not responsive to the level
I noticed
of the ICBM.
Admiral Wolf sort of moved back in his chair when you said that. Thank you for the clarification. Admiral Wolf, are the boomers always ready?
Yes, sir. And I think you really need to get down to the tactics of what you mean by always ready. Obviously, our SSBNs, when deployed, are alert, in a posture ready to go. I think there's a nuance, what General Guevara is saying, and he's right when we say responsive, because they're always, a technical term, spun up, ready to go. Ours are in a different posture that when called upon rapidly get there, but not to the level that the Minuteman starts with.
The Minuteman or the Sentinel is a use it or lose it situation. We've talked extensively about wiping out 400 silos or maybe some portion thereof. And therefore, in order to have that weapon, you have to launch it on warning. Is that correct, General?
Congressman, that is not correct. That is one scenario that might happen, but there are other scenarios that could develop in different ways.
How?
So there could be an attack that is less than something that takes out the entire force. There could be an attack that the president chooses not to respond. There could be any number of other areas. The attack could be not against the ICBMs, but against a city,
the nuclear
for example.
sponge might be real. The
Apologies, say
president
again?
chooses to not to launch, therefore those silos are taken out.
So another scenario might be that the attack against the country is not against the silos, but against some other part of
Thank
the
you.
United States.
One question here. Admiral Wolf, what's the cost of a Columbia?
Sir, I forget what the exact number is, but it's about, I'd have to take that for a look up, but 8 to 9 billion is what.
What's the cost of a B-21?
I have this embedded in the back of my eyes. The B-21, one of the KPPs, was it was going to be no more than $550 per plane in 2011 dollars for 100 airplanes. Right now, with inflation, it's approximately $700 million for 100 airplanes.
So for $137 billion, which is the current cost estimate of the Sentinel, we could, in just rough mathematics, have another 120 B-21s, complete with an LSRO. Or we can have, let's see, 130 billion divided by, say, 10 billion.
Congressman, if I
13 new Columbias. Correct? Just simple math?
Well, sir, that's just for the platform. You have to add the weapons cost and all of the things that go along with that, which, as the Sentinel is a
As you
full up.
do with the Sentinel.
But the cost they're looking at is that full up. When we talk about a Columbia platform, that's different than the all-up weapons system as well.
Ms. Herbie, does 137 billion include your $20 billion for the weapons? It does not. Because you've already said that you're not Nunn-McCurdy.
Yeah, no, our budget is allocated separately.
Yes, it is. And therefore, the cost of the Sentinel is more than 137 billion if you want a new nuclear bomb. I yield back.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the members for asking good questions, and we will be adjourned.